And I say that as a compliment to you.
I appreciate that.
That is the truth, my man. And I think if your politics weren't looked down upon by the institutional powers that be, you'd get that type of respect and credit that you deserve. But just let me say this. All of those people, after all that, the government stated at trial, 200 agents, $15 million, 6 years, and they offered that they made no audio or videotapes on me. Never bugged my phone. Now, Mike Robertson, a retired Secret Service agent, come right out and said they railroaded this guy. He said because Secret Service wouldn't even indict a Traficant. He says whenever you have no physical evidence at all, he says you've got to get some sort of admission from the target themselves. He said, and this is what he said, when I read in the newspaper that the government stated they made no tapes on this man, send nobody to it with him with a body mic, no videotapes, he says, I knew why. It's very simple. Traficant is not guilty, and he said Traficant could have subpoenaed all of those tapes, he says, because I guarantee you, he said they had boxes of them, and he says they could have all been exculpatory for Traficant. It says, where's the crime?
So they had nothing to introduce.
Yeah, you've been around a long time. How can you believe 6-year investigation? And the jury was basically gerrymandered. They were scared to death. They were afraid to talk several of the people after it. They dismissed one juror the day before he had a death in the family, and they didn't give him 2-3 hours to go to the funeral. They got rid of him because they knew they get given these notebooks, and they're supposed to keep their notes in them, and they were not to take them out of the courtroom. And several jurors said that it was evident they were going through their notes. It is a hell of a mess. They passed a special rule in Ohio. No one from my congressional district was eligible to serve on the jury. But you know, all about this time, Michael, that they were doing this with over 200 agents. Our country was attacked. The Twin Towers and the Pentagon were attacked. And they were more interested in Jim Traficant, evidently, in our national security. And I think there's some real questions about these attacks. And, you know, the main thing that bothered me very much, though, is they move very fast. And I started to get information. People trusted me because I had beaten, the only American ever to beat the Justice Department in a RICO trial, pro se, without being attorney in '83. And I was targeted ever since. But people trusted me, and they gave me information. And I started getting a hell of a lot of information about what 911 was about and who was involved with it. Next thing you know, bang, they come down on me like a ton of bricks. And I believe that I would have gotten information. I ended up getting information anyway over a period of years while I was in prison. And I got more information about that 911 activity than I have, to this point, even mentioned. But that 911 commission, like all commissions, is designed to, I believe, massage the issue, not solve it or investigate it.
You know, Jim, I've told the story on this program. I ran into you over at the Taverna, our favorite restaurant here, which unfortunately now it's closed. That's another story for another time.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, I ran into you over there on like September 12th or September 13th, and I remember you telling me in the only way that you can how you got up on the floor of the House of Representatives and dared to suggest that the reason why we were attacked was because of our policy in the Middle East. And I remember you telling me that you looked around and saw all these members of Congress with their jaws hanging down to their knees.
That's right.
Yeah, I remember that so vividly because at that time, everybody was just kind of playing along with the official story. But, you know, this is the problem, and you pointed this out in your interview with American Free Press, that there have been so many major events. I mean, look, your case alone is a perfect example of how the government commits misdeeds, how they target people politically, how they do conspire to do bad things. And repeatedly throughout your career in Congress, you pointed this out, whether it was the FBI, the IRS, the BATF, whether it was Janet Reno and Bill Clinton and the Red Chinese Secret Service. It went on and on. And a lot of Americans still find it hard to believe, but you were there. You've seen it yourself.
Yeah, you know, what I said on the House floor was, in fact, the truth. I said 911 was the issue of the United States of America simply because of our one-sided policy in the Mideast, that we have now, I said, we've imported the violence and people are giving us a taste for being so unobjective. Now, I'm the number one target of Israel right now, and I will say this. There's no doubt in my mind what they were concerned about me. I had a bigger following than people would like to admit.
Mm-hmm.
I had a little funny style about me, but people knew that I didn't double-speak. I didn't use all the fancy words. I basically told it like it was, and I tried to do it in a way to be entertaining enough so people might listen to me, because Congress was never going to promote somebody like me. They didn't like my policies. But what I said was, and I say this till today, is you've got a powerful foreign entity that's controlling this government, and the American people are just sitting back, and they're afraid to say anything. Congress is afraid to say anything. That's how powerful it is. So, I do a column now for the American Free Press. I've gotten a lot of bad publicity, to be quite honest about it,
Oh,
Michael.
absolutely.
They're saying, boy, he's really radical, he's with a radical organization. But I'm going to tell you something. The bottom line is this. I'm not afraid to say what's wrong with the country. I'm not against anybody. But listen, I wasn't elected to the Israeli Knesset or the Japanese Diet. I was elected to the United States Congress, and by God, I'm going to say what I think is a problem in the country. And listen, we're in wars we shouldn't be involved in. We're bankrupt over them for an expansionist policy of a foreign country. And when their prime minister, not their publicity man, but when their prime minister says, we control the American government, I think everybody should be listening.
Well, that's a hell of a way to go into the break. All right, ladies and gentlemen. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Michael Collins Piper here at republicbroadcasting.org with our special guest, former Congressman Jim Traficant. Jim, I want to remind you about something which you've probably totally forgotten, but it's quite relevant to what we were just talking about. Back in, I think I met you for the first time in person back in about late 1986 or early 1987. And the way that came about was very, very interesting because we had two brothers who were writing for the old newspaper, The Spotlight. Their names were Ken and Jim Collier, and they focused mainly on the issue of computerized vote fraud. But they wanted to make some extra money, and they came around the office one day and they said, hey, Mike, what could we do to make some extra money doing other stories for The Spotlight? And I said, well, you could do some interviews. And they said, yeah, okay, who could we interview? And I said, well, I'll tell you what. There's this guy that just got elected to Congress a couple years ago named Jim Traficant. And I said, why don't you see if you can get an interview with Traficant? I said, I'll go along. I'd like to meet this guy, and I'll take the pictures. Well, Ken Collier and I came over, and we sat down with you. I think they call that the speaker's lobby out there. And we sat down there. We sat with you in your office for a while and took some pictures and talked, and then you had to go for a vote. And then you came back, and we sat down and talked a little bit more. But, the funny thing, Jim, is that guy Jim Collier and Ken Collier who wrote for The Spotlight, they were Jewish guys. So the next time somebody throws this anti-Semitic, Liberty Lobby, American Free Press thing at you, you can just tell them that the first reporter for American Free Press and its predecessor, The Spotlight, to interview you was a nice Jewish guy named Ken Collier. That's something you probably didn't know. You had no reason to know, but I'm telling you here on the air right now. So next time they shove the anti-Semitic stuff at you, you shove it back at them. Shove them back with the facts.
Well, Michael, I'm not an anti-Semite. I just tell it the way it is, and it happens to be the truth. But, I will say this to you, and I look back in retrospect. I became very dangerous to the Israeli lobby because I was probably featured on national TV interviews, and my speeches were starting to be picked up on different issues, and people had started to follow me, and they started to believe and listen to what I was saying. And I was saying that our country was in a vice, that we had a one-sided policy in the Mideast, and it was largely to do with our economic problems, not just our terrorist and military problems. And now, as we look here today, I've been taking a lot of flack for statements I made on the Greta Van Susteren show, and a couple people come after me, treating me like I'm a kook or whatever. But let me just tell you something. I said it earlier. We're involved in foreign wars we have little or no real major interest in. My God, the Capitol Police could overrun Iraq. Second of all, it's an expansionist policy strictly for Israel. They control and powerfully manipulate